the holiday season. There are 3 weeks left in the NFL season, and as always, given it's Thursday, we're going to talk about our NFL power rankings and discuss who is hot and who is not in the home stretch of this NFL season. But before we get into the video, I want to take a second to ask you to please subscribe to the channel, ring the bell for notifications. Really helps out. If you're a fan of the NFL, you'll love this channel as we release multiple NFL-related videos every Thursday and Saturday all year long. Now, let's get back to the video. So, we're going to start out, as always, with our bottom 12 teams. I don't want to talk about these teams that much, though. For the most part, all these teams are out of the playoff race. The only one really still competing at all as anything other than spoiler or for a top-tier draft pick is the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons are 7-7. They're only one game out of the divisional lead, and they hold the tiebreak against that divisional leader in all circumstances, given the Falcons have beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers twice already this season. However, the Atlanta Falcons have looked absolutely putrid lately. They've lost four of their last five games, and the one they won was by 6 points against the Raiders, where they only put up 15. And that was with Desmond Ridder starting for the Raiders. That was an awful, awful game on Monday Night Football this past week. I don't trust the Falcons. It looks like they're going to be turning to Michael Penix. And, if Michael Penix turns up and is actually a very effective quarterback from the get-go for the Falcons, then I could see myself moving the Falcons up because they do have a lot of good pieces. Their receivers are great. Their running backs are great. Their defense isn't even that bad. But quarterback play has been a massive weakness for the Falcons, which is sad because I love Kirk Cousins. But either way, Falcons belong here at 22. Nobody else here really matters. Let's move over to our middle 10. And so here we are with our middle 10. This remains mostly unchanged. The only team that's new to this middle 10 is the Seahawks, falling from number 10 to number 11, thanks to a loss to the Green Bay Packers on Sunday Night Football this past week. Outside of that, we have a little bit of moving around within. We had the Texans moving up a couple of spots, taking over for the Bengals and the Dolphins, each moving down thanks to a loss in the scenario of the Dolphins and, a win that was whatever for the Bengals. Rams stayed in approximately the same spot, and the Commanders and Chargers, as well as the Seahawks, each moved down a spot thanks to the team that was 13th, moving up to number 10, which we're going to get to right now. Let's talk about number 10. That's the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This team is 8-6. They have beaten some of the best teams in the NFL, such as the Detroit Lions and the Philadelphia Eagles, already on the season. Their biggest issue was that they were injured for a significant part of the season. But their offense and defense are both very good units. Their running game is fantastic with Bucky Irving when he's healthy, as well as Rachaad White and Sean Tucker. Their receivers, Jalen McMillan's looking like he's filling in for that Chris Godwin role. Mike Evans is back and healthy. They still have Cade Otton if they need him. Baker Mayfield's been firing on all cylinders all season long. Really, in this latter part, he hasn't had to do as much because Bucky Irving in the running game has picked up some slack, and their opponents are weaker. But the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have a pretty easy schedule for the rest of the season. They're 8-6. They should be able to win the NFC South, and I predicted it a few weeks ago. I think they're going to get the third seed in the NFC. Now, the only reason they're getting the third seed in the NFC is because the top four go to the divisional leaders, and it's very clear that you have two teams in the NFC East and three teams in the NFC North, all of which would probably be ahead of the Buccaneers, but guess what? It's not what position in terms of record you are, it's where you are in your division that matters the most, and the Buccaneers will win the division, so we'll probably get the 3 seed in. They belong here in the top 10 as such, given how they played lately. At number 9, still staying at number 9, we have the Denver Broncos. I mean, there's not much to talk about with the Denver Broncos. They got their win this past week. They've been rolling recently. They do have some difficult matchups coming up. I think it is in week 18 that they go against the Kansas City Chiefs. That will be a massive test for the Broncos going into the playoffs. But I expect them to be able to make the playoffs because look at the AFC. It's kind of already a lock who's making the playoffs. There were pushes from teams like the Colts, the Bengals, and the Dolphins, but the fact that a couple of those teams lost this past week and the Bengals are just so far gone in this divisional race, with 9 wins, they would have to lose every remaining game basically to not have a very, very, very good shot at the playoffs. I think the Broncos are going to be in pretty easily, and we'll see how they do come the playoffs. We'll see what Bo Nix is like when he's got to go almost definitely, I think it is definitely, on the road in week 1 of the playoffs playing against a divisional leader. Now, the Broncos could get that 5 seed, which is where you want to be, because then you get to go against the Houston Texans, a game that's absolutely winnable for the Broncos. But if they get the 6th or 7th wildcard seed, well, now you have to go against one of the Ravens, the Steelers, the Bills, or the Chiefs. Much tougher opponents going on the road to visit. We'll see how the Broncos do, but hey, they belong here in the top 10 at number 9 because they have definitely exceeded expectations in the 2024 NFL season. On to number 8, we have the Green Bay Packers. They destroyed a fellow top 10 team this past week in the Seattle Seahawks on Sunday Night Football. They looked really good in that game. Their running game with Josh Jacobs was fantastic. Their passing game was very good. Their defense was solid, shutting down Geno Smith, eventually knocking him out, and then shutting down Sam Howell. I got nothing but respect for the Packers. I've talked about this in past weeks, and nothing has changed. There is a cutoff between number 9 and number 8. It's not a knock on the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos are the 9th best team in the league, but they are significantly still below the Green Bay Packers. Packers are here, Broncos are here. The other top teams are probably in like this range. So Green Bay, definitely a team I could see winning the Super Bowl. Unlike the Broncos, you could be frisky, win a game, but I don't see anybody 9 or later winning the Super Bowl. The Packers absolutely could. They're a really good team. They're at 10-4, which is still 2 games back of 2nd place in the division, which just shows you how good the NFC North is. And so they're almost certainly going to be in the 2nd or 3rd wild card and have to have a pretty tough matchup if they're in that 7th wild card, because they'll have to go against the 2 seed, which is going to be one of the Eagles, the Vikings, or the Lions. But hey, if you get into the 2nd wild card spot, then you get to go against probably the Buccaneers, maybe the Falcons, though, as I said, unlikely, or the Rams or the Seahawks, all of which are clearly winnable games for the Packers. So if they can just hold where they're at, they actually have a pretty good run in the playoffs, and I expect them to be pretty good there. On to number 7, holding their place from last week, we have at 9-5, the Baltimore Ravens. The Baltimore Ravens got a massive test in Week 16 of the NFL season. They are going to go head-to-head against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers won the earlier matchup between these two teams earlier this season, and if the Ravens lose that game, they are out of contention for the division. Now, if the Ravens win the game, they are still technically behind the Steelers on a tiebreak, but given the fact that the Steelers have the Chiefs and Bengals remaining, the Ravens, I can't remember who they have in Week 16. I think it's the Texans, and then they have the Browns. That's a much easier schedule. Not a guaranteed win schedule, but it's a much easier schedule. So a win here by the Ravens, they don't control their destiny for the division, but they certainly put themselves in a good position to win the division if they win out, hoping that the Steelers will drop one of those last 2 games of the regular season. The Ravens, as I've said though, they're inconsistent. I'm not going to tell you right now, that's actually coming later this video, on who I'm picking between the Steelers and Ravens. It was a very close call, but the Ravens have been very inconsistent all year. We get one of the best teams in the league sometimes, but then we get one of the worst others. And so that's the reason why they're this far down, because one, a 9-5 record is not good enough to beat any of the teams above them, and they're just inconsistent, so I can't put them any higher than 7. At number 6, we have their divisional rival who is leading the division, the Pittsburgh Steelers at 10-4. The Steelers lost this past week to the Philadelphia Eagles, a very tough matchup, so you can't knock the Steelers too much in that ball game. They were also missing George Pickens, their number 1 receiver, which hurt, and TJ Watt left the game early, all of which impacted the Steelers and their ability to be competitive in that game. We still don't know what the likelihood of TJ Watt and of George Pickens is to play on Saturday against the Ravens. I think that's going to be a very important factor for if the Steelers are able to compete and win against the Ravens. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But either way, the Steelers still control their destiny in the AFC North. Even if they lose to the Ravens, they still controlled their destiny because they still hold the tie breaks. And they would have to still beat teams like the Bengals and the Chiefs. Not easy matchups for sure, but definitely winnable games for the Steelers, especially if Patty Mahomes is out for the Chiefs, and we don't really know what Patty Mahomes' health is right now. We don't know if he's going to play in Week 16 or Week 17 or Week 18, so we'll have to wait and see. He's listed as week to week, but he might play this week, and that's going to have a massive impact. But either way, we're not talking about the games. We're talking about the power rankings, and yes, the Steelers belong here at number 6. They drop a spot because they did lose, but again, they had some injuries. Those guys will be back soon. I'm putting them at number 6. At number 5, moving up one spot in our power rankings, we have the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings get to move up thanks to the Pittsburgh Steelers' loss. They are 12-2, which is tied for the second best record in the NFL. They have been a very good team all season long. They just seem to be able to win no matter what. There was a brief period of time, I think a 4-week stretch, where they barely beat the Jaguars, the Titans, the Colts, and the Bears, where I was a little bit hesitant on where I wanted to put the Vikings. But the last 2 weeks, they absolutely dominated the Bears and the Falcons. And yes, I acknowledge those are not necessarily easy teams. But they dominated them. And that's what matters to me more than anything. Like, I didn't care that they beat I didn't care anything about their previous games. They still won. But when you don't dominate bad teams, it's tough to see that you'll be able to compete against good teams. When you dominate bad teams, it lets everybody know that if you play at that caliber, you will compete against the best teams. That's what the Vikings have started to do over the past 2 weeks. They're picking it back up, and they belong here at number 5. And the only reason they're not higher is because I think the top 4 in the NFL right now are just absolutely phenomenal teams that all have narratives to be considered number 1 on these power rankings. The only one I don't think has a narrative to be number 1 is the Minnesota Vikings, which is why they're number 5. But hey, this team's still really, really good. And so moving into our top 4, we start out with the Kansas City Chiefs, with the best record in football at 13-1, moving down a spot in the power rankings, even after they kind of dominated the Cleveland Browns. What's with that? Well, I'll be honest, the main reason I moved them down is because a team that was in number 4 last week had a really good week, so got to move up in these power rankings. That's the only reason the Chiefs moved down. But the other reason is we don't know the health of Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes is almost definitely going to be back come the playoffs, but we don't know if he's playing in week 15, week 16, or week 17. And let's be honest, the Chiefs do not have an easy final 3 weeks of the season. They got the Houston Texans this week, they got the Pittsburgh Steelers the week after that, and they got the Denver Broncos the week after that. Those are 3 playoff teams that the Kansas City Chiefs have to go up against in the next 3 weeks, and they may not have Patrick Mahomes for any of them. And if he is injured, this is the worst time to be injured because they're going to play Saturday, so play on 1 less day's rest, and then the next week they're playing on Wednesday because it's a Christmas Day game that they're in. So they got very tight turnarounds coming up due to the Kansas City Chiefs, and so I am not totally sold on their ability to win those games if Patrick Mahomes isn't there. All respect to Carson Wentz, but he is not good enough to control that team, so I am dropping them down 1 spot, down to 4th. But hey, if Patrick Mahomes is healthy and plays like he can, and the Chiefs keep using their black magic, they probably start to move back up these power rankings in the next few weeks as they continue to win games. At number 3, dropping 2 spots thanks to a loss on Sunday, we have the Detroit Lions. I would not have normally dropped the Lions 2 spots here, and as you can even see, I forgot to remove the background on the one that was there before, and so that's on me. But either way, the Detroit Lions, they were so good 2 weeks ago. I dropped them to 3rd, and they were able to beat the Green Bay Packers on Thursday Night Football with a slew of injuries, and I was like, hey, okay, I was mistaken. I dropped them to 3 because of their injuries. They absolutely belong back at number 1, so I moved them back to number 1. And then what happened this past week against the Buffalo Bills? Their injuries came back to bite them in the ass. Now, the Detroit Lions offense is still fantastic. Yes, they're missing David Montgomery, but come on. I mean, they still got Jahmyr Gibbs. He can be a bell cow running back. I'm not too worried about the Lions offense, even if Montgomery's missing. But the defense. Oh, man, the defense is going to be a big issue. And earlier in the season, when we talked about the Detroit Lions injury issues, the nice thing was a lot of the guys who were injured were coming back by playoff time. The only guy who really wasn't was Aiden Hutchinson, but they already replaced him with Zadarius Smith. And I mean, replaced as much as they could. Obviously, Aiden Hutchinson is one of, if not the best defensive players in the NFL. Zadarius Smith isn't that, but he definitely filled in the role nicely. However, this past week against the Bills, the Lions took a bunch of massive gut punches. I mean, one is the David Montgomery out for the season with torn MCL. That hurts. I mean, Jahmyr Gibbs can step in, and so that would be a recoverable injury for the team, but still hurts. But the biggest ones are Liam McNeil, who tore his ACL. He's done for the season. That's a $100 million defensive tackle when you're already missing Aiden Hutchinson on the defensive line that you're going to be missing for the rest of the season. Beyond that, Carlton Davis, the team's number one corner, also has a fractured jaw, is out 6 to 8 weeks, which means he's not going to be back until about the NFC Championship or later. So the Lions absolutely have a very difficult path, now missing a bunch of top-tier guys for the remainder of the season. And so I have to knock them down here to number 3 because they're just in a lot of trouble. And yeah, their offense can put up points. I still believe they should be able to win any playoff game that they have. Like, if they go into the 5 seed or whatever it is, okay, I think they can beat the worst divisional winner. If they go into the 2 seed, I think they can beat probably the Commanders, who end up in the 2nd or the 3rd wild card. But after that, once you got to go against teams like the Eagles, the Vikings, or the Packers after the first round of the playoffs, that's going to be where the Lions might struggle, because these are some really, really good football teams. Sorry, and I should also not knock the Buccaneers. But these are really good football teams, and I'm not sure that a beat-up Lions team can compete against them that well. They're still at 3 because their offense can play in a shootout, and they have at least shown that they can compete with a lot of injuries in recent weeks. Look no further than the Packers game that they won recently, but this is still a team that's in a lot of trouble, and we'll see what they do, but they had to get dropped to number 3. At number 2, moving up 2 spots, we have the Buffalo Bills, who beat the Detroit Lions this past week in an absolute shootout. Now, it was a one-possession game. It was 48-42, I believe, at the end of the day. But the Lions scored with very little time left. They failed to recover the onside kick. Even if they had it, they would have needed a Hail Mary to win it. The Buffalo Bills controlled this game for the majority of it. They were up by 21 points at one point. I mean, a lot of people are lamenting on the Lions' decision to do an onside kick early in the 4th quarter. But, like, do you remember how much the Lions were down at that point in the game? It totally made sense to me to do something like that. And that's the way Dan Campbell plays. It's fine. But it's clear that the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen were able to exploit the lack of depth on the Detroit Lions defense. And yes, some of that depth is going to be coming back by playoffs. Guys like Ennis Rakestraw, Alex Anzalone. Like, the Lions are going to get guys back. But obviously, losing Aleem McNeil and Carlton Davis, who are going to be out for a long term, it's going to be tough to take down a team like the Buffalo Bills, like the Kansas City Chiefs, like the Baltimore Ravens, like the Minnesota Vikings, Green Bay Packers, etc. Every team that we've seen basically in this top 8 because, yeah. But either way, I'm talking about the Lions, primarily because I'm a Lions fan. We should be talking about the Bills. And the fact is, the last 2 weeks, Josh Allen has proven why he's the MVP. This guy just puts up points no matter what. Now, the Buffalo Bills defense does leave a bit to be desired. But at the very least, I think they can figure their shit out because they've shown it earlier this season that their defense does have capabilities. And they're getting healthier. Matt Milano has come back. Let's see if he gets, his feet under him and becomes a top-tier linebacker like he was before all these injuries. Rasul Douglas, still a fantastic cornerback. They've added some guys at safety. Like, the Buffalo Bills, I think, will figure it out. And so, given they've beat the number 3 and the number 4 team on this list, who have 3 losses total among them, 2 of those losses being to the Buffalo Bills, yeah, this team belongs here at number 2, no doubt about it. And at number 1, for the first time this season, we got the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are a team that I didn't really plan on putting at number 1, but we finally just had enough teams fall off. Like this past week, we had the Detroit Lions lose. The week before, we had the Buffalo Bills lose. I believe it was the week or 2 before that, we had the Kansas City Chiefs lose. And while all those losses have been happening, the Philadelphia Eagles just keep knocking off wins. And because they keep knocking off wins, I got to put them here at number 1. It's been a long, long time since this team has lost a football game. Their defense is dominant. If Saquon Barkley is healthy, which I expect he will be, the offense is dominant, even if the passing game isn't as good as I would like it to be. I've talked about this before. But, all the rumors and all the myths about the rift between A.J. Brown and Jalen Hurts were at least somewhat dismissed this past week with an A.J. Brown touchdown. We'll see if that re-rises as the season comes on. But the Philadelphia Eagles, I never thought I'd put them here at the start of the year because of how they finished last year. But guess what? Right now, they're the number 1 team in the NFL. And so that's it for our power rankings. But as always, we do our Thursday Night Football matchups before we end this video. And today, we actually also do our Saturday football matchups because we have 2 Saturday games. And so we're going to start with the Thursday game. The Denver Broncos visiting the Los Angeles Chargers. This is a massive game for the AFC wildcard standings. These are two NFC West opponents. They're within one game of each other in the AFC West and in the wild card. This will be a big rivalry game. The Broncos definitely have the leg up because they have the game in hand on the Chargers, but the Chargers are at home in this game, and that matters. Vegas has the Chargers tapped to win this game, and I came really close to taking the Chargers, but the Broncos have just looked like the better team to me recently, and I understand that the Chargers have the home field advantage. It's a rivalry game. They're going to get up for it. Sometimes who's better doesn't really matter in these rivalry games. It's more the home field. It's more emotional, but I'm still going to give the talent edge to the Denver Broncos. Their defense is really good. Their offense has figured things out throughout the season. While I do like the Los Angeles Chargers as a team, I just like the Broncos a little bit more, and I think they'll manage to pull it off, especially given that the Chargers' run game has not been as good since J.K. Dobbins went out, at least in my opinion, and so Broncos to upset and win this football game on Thursday night. Next, moving on to our first of our Saturday games, we got the Houston Texans visiting the Kansas City Chiefs. This is a really tough one because this game comes down to one question and one question only. Does Patrick Mahomes play? If Patrick Mahomes plays, this is an easy, walk-it-in Kansas City Chiefs win. I'm not going to say easy, but while the Houston Texans are going to make the playoffs in the AFC, I don't think they're that good. They're probably the weakest of the playoff teams in the AFC, but for maybe you could say the Chargers are weaker. Maybe, but even that's a stretch to me with what we've seen from the Texans this season. I mean, a big reason why the Texans have as good a record as they do is just because they're beating up on the AFC South, which is the Colts, the Texans, and the Jaguars. Woo, good for you, Texans. That's real well done. And the Texans got tough games coming up. Like we talked about it before. They have the Chiefs this week, and then next week, they got the Baltimore Ravens. That's two difficult games when this team is only 8-6 right now. They could easily drop to 8-8. Yeah, okay, final week of the season, they play whoever they play in the AFC South. They probably win that game, but 9-8 is a downward trend for the Texans, and the only reason they'll make the playoffs is because, frankly, the AFC South just sucks, and there's no one that's going to take the division. On the flip side, the Kansas City Chiefs, they've managed to just win every game somehow, some way, and at home, I totally expect them to be able to do the same against the Texans if Mahomes is there. But again, if he's not and Carson Wentz is there, I think the Texans are a good enough team to pull off a win against the Chiefs with no Mahomes. And so, really, this is the question I have to ask myself. Do I think Mahomes plays? And I've gone with yes. I'm just going with yes. I think Mahomes will play. Even if he doesn't, I do at least trust Andy Reid will keep this game close. And so maybe the Chiefs in Arrowhead against the Texans team that hasn't been as good this season can still pull it off, even if Mahomes plays. But I went with the balance of probabilities, giving it to 50-50 split. I think that the Chiefs winning, if they have Mahomes, is more likely than the Chiefs losing if they don't. So I went with the Chiefs to win this one. But man, this is close, and it all comes down to Mahomes and if he plays. And our final game is going to be the Steelers visiting the Ravens. This will be an absolutely fantastic football game, as it always is when these two football teams play against each other. And much like the previous matchup, this is just going to come down to injuries. I'm sorry to say, but it's really tough to call games multiple days ahead of time when you don't know what's happening with injuries. Because for the Pittsburgh Steelers, are George Pickens and TJ Watt playing? If they're not, I'm pretty comfortable picking the Baltimore Ravens. And the Baltimore Ravens are heavily favored in this game. Let me be clear, way too heavily favored in this game. They're minus 200 something to win this game. That's insane given the fact that the Steelers, I believe, have won something 9 of the last 10 games between these two teams. It's not even close between these two teams who has dominated the era of Steelers versus Lamar Jackson's Ravens. Even when the Steelers didn't have any quarterbacks going for them, like Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, etc., they still beat and shut down Lamar Jackson. Only one of those games that Lamar Jackson has played in has he put up over 20 points against the Pittsburgh Steelers. And that includes a game that they played against each other earlier this year. And Baltimore has not beat the Steelers in Baltimore in over half a decade. Again, the Steelers have dominated this matchup in recent history. Lamar has struggled against them, but it's going to come down to how healthy the Steelers are. If they're beat up, yeah, I think the Ravens can still take this. But if the Steelers are healthy, I'm going to take the Steelers, and I'm going to go by the same logic I went by with the Chiefs. I'm going to assume health. I acknowledge, if guys are injured, my picks are out the window. But I'm just going to go on the side of teams being healthy, and if the Steelers are healthy, I think they pull off the win again against the Baltimore Ravens and lock up the AFC North. And with them going against the Kansas City Chiefs this next week, that would be a massive game, because if the Chiefs win that, or if the Chiefs lose that game to the Steelers and the Chiefs lose either remaining game with the Steelers winning out, then the Steelers and the Bills could very feasibly tie and hold the tiebreak against the Chiefs. And then I honestly don't know who holds the tiebreak between the Steelers and the Bills. I'm not going to figure that out, but again, it would be totally plausible for Kansas City to drop all the way to the 3rd seed, which would be crazy given they're 13-1. But hey, that's this NFL season for you. But either way, guys, that's it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed. Remember, if you did, leave a like and comment down below. Help us out. Help us grow. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you're enjoying your holiday season. I will see you all Saturday for our weekly pick'ems. As always, peace!